Friday, October the 29th. We're in Covington, Kentucky at the 12th Armored Division reunion. My name is Charla Henson, and I am interviewing John Sathrum from B43. I appreciate you coming today. Let us talk to you. First of all, I want your full name, where you're from, and your parents' names, and sort of their background real quickly.
Okay. My name is John Marvin Sathrum. The H is pronounced like in water. My father's name was Ole Sathrum. My mother's name was Eva Beatrice Wheel. I was born in Long Beach, California, April 5th, 1923. I'm known as a prune picker. Not many people know native-born Californians are prune pickers, but others are known as hoosers or corn huskers. I'm a prune picker. I went to school in Carlsbad, California, Oceanside, California, and I graduated after the war at the University of California at Santa Barbara. So that's my schooling.
Okay. Tell me how you got into the Army.
Well,
your ages and the situations.
I was in Oceanside Carlsbad Community College. The Navy and the Marines had programs that I could not qualify for because of my eyes. The Army came through with a program to enlist in the Army Reserve and stay in college till you graduated. I took my Army physical. The only requirement was that you were warm and mobile. So they accepted me, and I stayed in college until June 10th of 1943. I was called to active duty the 24th of June, 1943. I went to Camp Fannin, Texas for my basic training. I left there in October and went to Texas A&M for the Army Specialized Training Program. I had 10 days before the semester started, so I dashed home to California, married my college sweetheart, Mary Edith Conley. We drove back to Texas A&M, and we were there until the program collapsed, and we went to the 12th Armored Division in April of 1944. At that time, I was assigned to the service company of the 43rd Tank Battalion as a tank mechanic. This was based on some prior education and experience. In June of 44, I was one of the last fillers. I was transferred to B Company of the 43rd Tank Battalion to bring them up to full combat strength, and then participated in their training until we departed for Europe in September of 44. We pulled out of the port of New York about the 20th of September and arrived in Southampton, England, early in October. We ended up at Tidworth Barracks outside of Salisbury, England on around the 5th of October. And we cleaned equipment, we were issued new equipment, and it all had to be cleaned of cosmoline.
Tell me about that. Explain cosmoline and the process that y'all did.
Okay.
Because some of us aren't going to know that. Some of the people.
Well, let me say one thing first. My tank commander was very unhappy with me because while he and the other 3 members of the crew were out cleaning the equipment, the first sergeant detailed me to work in the warm exchange, selling soap and cigarettes and candy, etc. Now, to clean the equipment, like the internal parts of the main gun, and all the small arms. It's encased in a heavy coating of grease called cosmoline, and it can be cleaned with warm or boiling water and gasoline. But it's something you have to get your hands into, and it was very cold in October in England. So they were short-handed and blamed me because I wasn't there. So this brought on a new situation. I asked the first sergeant if he would transfer me to some other crew because I didn't feel that I wanted to go into combat under this situation. So he did. He transferred me into another crew, and my assignment was assistant driver and bow gunner. On a medium tank, there's a 30 caliber machine gun sticking out the front called the bow gun, and I operated that gun. The other duties of the assistant driver is to grease the bogey wheels when you stop, tell the driver jokes, provide him with cigarettes, and generally keep him happy.
What's a bogey wheel?
Okay. A bogey wheel is, well, bogey wheels are the wheels that support the tank, and they ride on the tread. When a tank moves across the ground, you're continually laying a platform, and those bogey wheels ride on the track. And the reason they're called a bogey wheel is that there's two wheels in one unit, and that's a bogey. And when you hit a bump, one goes down, the other goes up, and the volute spring in the center of these two wheels takes the shock. And so it makes it a very easy riding piece of equipment, unless you're going across ditches. Then it's a little tough.
And how often did you have to grease these? Each time you stopped, every day?
The tank commander wanted me to grease them every time we stopped. Of course, I didn't always do that, but that was the perfect way to do it. Nobody's perfect.
Okay. Then, so tell me about the bow gun, about how, if you were to put yourself in the tank, what is around you? Close your eyes or act like you're closing your eyes and tell us about what is around you and about the process of shooting the bow gun.
Well, okay. I have a seat in the bottom right-hand side of the tank. To the left of me is the final drive, or what you would understand as the transmission. And on the left is the track on the outside. So I have a space inside to sit. Now, this 30 caliber machine gun is mounted through an opening, and it's all on a ball joint. So if you want to shoot down, you lift up the back, or if you want to shoot up, you push it down side to side. You could actually inscribe a circle with your bullets. And we fired about every fourth or fifth round was a tracer. So you adjust your fire by observing the tracers. And I oftentimes, as we were going down the road in action, not an administrative move, but in combat, I would oftentimes fire on heavy brush and where somebody might be concealed and threaten us.
Okay, good job. Okay, now then, we can go back to cleaning. I kind of got you off because I wanted to know about the equipment. Now then, let's go back to, you were telling us how to get the grease and all that kind of stuff off. And so let's tell us about the process of getting it ready and getting it in the boats and getting to Europe.
Well, Uh, in due time, we motor marched in convoy to Portland, England, and I, with other tank crews, loaded aboard an LST, a landing ship tank, and we took off on the 20th of October for France. We journeyed up the Seine River to Rouen, France, and offloaded and drove to Cressy, which was our assembly area. And we stayed there. We had Thanksgiving dinner there, and we departed on the 29th of November. At that time, we joined 7th Army, and over the next 4 days, we traveled to Luneville, France. From there, we arrived on the 4th, and on the 6th, we started our first combat action, attacking the town of Singling, France.
Before we Okay, we had just gotten to spell that word, Singling?
Singling.
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 Okay.
Singling.
Your first battle, correct?
Right.
Okay.
It was the greatest lark, you might say, that I'd ever been on. It was exciting. None of us knew exactly what we were in for. We were all apprehensive and somewhat scared. Nobody wants to put their life in danger, but we were a team, and we had to work together. And nobody wanted to jeopardize the team effort. So we did it. Like Nike says, just do it.
Okay, describe, as you go into the first battle, give us a picture of what you were seeing and experiencing. Can you look out straight ahead from your seating position in the tank and kind of explain it?
No, you have two options as a driver or as an assistant driver, bow gunner. You can either leave the hatch open and stick your head out, or you can close the hatch and use a periscope. Now, a periscope is approximately 12 to 14 inches long. You look in the bottom and the top sticks out through the hatch, and you observe the territory. Of course, that limits your vision because you can only see in the direction you have it pointed. And generally speaking, we have our head sticking out until something happens that causes us to button up. Now, you can't rotate the turret, which was power driven, with the hatches open. So if the tank commander picks up a target and wants the gunner to traverse the turret, we have to close our hatches, because those hatches stick up and the gun would hit him. So sometimes we have to close the hatch, but if that's the case, we probably would anyway. It protects us from the muzzle blast from the cannon. That's rather severe. I wear 2 hearing aids because of those muzzle blasts.
Okay, get us into Singling.
Well, my tank commander was the platoon leader, and his job was to direct the rest of the platoon. And I was along for the ride. And I don't believe I fired my bow gun that day, but I was there if I was needed. And we took the town, and I can't tell you too much about it.
Okay, as we go on down the road a little bit, what is the next thing that just sticks in your mind?
Well, we got through that one. And then we were involved in other operations. We'd pull back and do maintenance, and we were in several skirmishes, and then for about 5 days we did maintenance and had Christmas Day and Christmas dinner. And on the 29th of December, we had an administrative move and changed areas. We were in a given area, and they moved us southeast to another area. And this was interesting because on this road march, I got to drive the tank a little bit, which I enjoyed doing. So we did a little training with our infantry unit that was a part of our combat command. We were in Combat Command A, and the infantry battalion was the 66th Armored Infantry Battalion. And on the 15th of January, we whitewashed our tanks for an upcoming operation. And early on the morning of the 16th, it was dark, we had a road march to our line of departure. On the road, we crossed over the Zorn River and out into a flat area. Oh, there was about 6 feet difference in elevation from the Zorn River to the Rhine River, so it was basically flat. And on our right flank was Steinwall Woods. Our objective was Offendorf to our front. And on the left flank was a town called Herlsheim. And we got out into this area. Being in a platoon leader's tank, I could listen to the company net and the battalion net. So I heard all the conversations between the battalion commander and the company commander, and so I had perhaps a better picture than some of the fellows in the other tanks. But I still had no input what was going on other than our objective was Offendorf, which was about 3 or 4 kilometers from the Rhine River. And I found out afterwards it was the area where they were building up a push to retake the city of Strasbourg. I've learned a lot since about it, but at the time I just knew we were there. And I heard the battalion commander tell the company commanders that they wouldn't let us advance on Offendorf and they wouldn't let us pull back. We just had to stay there until they decided what to do next, because we were getting shot at from all 3 areas. And my tank commander was the nervous type. Every time a round hit, he would have the driver move the tank. Well, if you're a German anti-tank gun commander and you're observing the battlefield and you see something move, it's going to attract your attention. Well, they hit us, and the sound was deafening. The strike of that projectile, And what it did, it hit right at the junction of the tank and the turret. And it more or less welded the turret to the tank, and we could not rotate the turret. So in all practical terms, we were out of action. But the tank commander abandoned us. And I don't know when the rest of the crew went. Nobody said a word to me, or I was so deafened that I couldn't hear it. When I saw the driver leave, I left. And by
How
the...
did you get out?
Pardon?
How did y'all get out? The turret was closed.
Well, you open the turret.
Oh, the turret was still...
I mean, you open my assistant driver's hatch on the... There's a flat slope and then the front slope. And I'm not the most athletic person in the world, but by the time I got out, there wasn't a soul around me. And I hesitated for a moment and thought, if I get back in that tank, we can drive it to ordnance and get it repaired. But the Germans made the decision before I did, because they hit it again and set it afire. So the decision was made. I was on foot. I didn't have my helmet, but I had my grease gun, and I was wearing a pair of boots that the Army called a shoe pack. It was the best thing they had at the time, but it had some problems. So anyway, I had observed that we crossed the Zorn River on a bridge before we entered this field. So the Zorn River was lined with trees. And so I followed the tree line back to the road and crossed the Zorn River on the road. And as I had mentioned earlier, I had been in service company. Well, I knew some of the service company drivers, and here was an empty service company truck coming down the road going back to the battalion. So I flagged him down, and I was just getting in. The MPs grabbed me by the belt and pulled me back out of the truck, said, "You're not going anyplace." So they held me there until an MP vehicle came, and they took me back to the Division Forward Replacement Company. And they interrogated me for several hours, wanting to know why I left the battlefield. And I explained to them that my tank was out there burning and that there was no purpose in my staying there. And so after about 3 days, I got back to my company, just as the company was involved in repulsing several German counterattacks. And about the 20th of January, we were relieved by the 36th Division. So then we pulled back. We lost, the battalion ended up with 6 howitzer tanks. That's a tank with a 105 howitzer in it, and 5 medium tanks, and out of some 56 or 58 tanks. We lost our battalion commander and all 3 company commanders. 1 was killed, and the rest of them were taken prisoner. We lost about 1/3 of our company. So then we reorganized, got new tanks, a few, some replacements. So then we started training the replacements. And at this time I became a driver. And one of the gunners became my tank commander, Sergeant Glenn White. So I fought the rest of the war with Sergeant White.
How did you survive all that? What in you kept you going after seeing all that and experiencing so many losses?
I would say peer pressure. just the fact that you couldn't be a coward around your buddies. There's no way I would do what I did on my own volition. I just wouldn't do it. But you just do it when you're a part of a team. You can't let them down. That's all I can say.
What about replacements? Did you see them the same as you did with those men that you had trained with? I mean, or was there a difference in how you saw a replacement?
Not really. We just they were absorbed in the various crews as they were made up, and my new assistant driver was PFC Parker, and he'd had, I believe, some armor training in the States. So he was new on the job just like I was originally, and he would learn. And he was my assistant driver throughout the rest of the war.
Did you ever face anything quite like that, Alicia?
You mean since?
Oh, but during the war.
Yes. Along about I'd say the 8th of April. We had been in Patton's army for a while, made our dash to the Rhine, got across the Rhine River, got to Würzburg, supported the 42nd Infantry Division, and the engineers. We kept the Germans pinned down while they rebuilt a bridge across the Main River, or Main River it is. And then we were continued attacking towns, objectives, and this one time we had an operation we dubbed the Flying Wedge. We were in one town and we still had to take another town before dark, and my tank commander, Sergeant White, said, "Okay, let's go full bore." So the whole I was driving the lead tank, and a tank is governed to 28 miles an hour, but when you disconnect the governor, you can get up to, my tank I could get up to 31 miles an hour. And so I had it just as fast as it would go, and we were blazing away with all our guns. We got into the town, and the infantry was supposed to be with us or meet us and help outpost the town, and they didn't show up for hours. So anyway, we got into the town and went to the far outskirts, and there was another tank behind us, and they outposted several places around town. And I had pulled my watch, and my Parker, my assistant driver, was on duty, and there was supposed to be an infantry patrol coming in, but these people were speaking German, and it wasn't our infantry patrol. And one of them fired a Panzerfaust. A Panzerfaust is a shoulder-fired, rocket-propelled, shape-charge weapon. And it goes so slow you can see it coming through the air. It kind of wobbles, just, and it was headed right for my tank, and it hit right on the front slope about just where my forehead would be. Now, the reason that shape charge can go through about 4 inches of armor plate, and the reason it did not penetrate is that we had sandbags on the front of our tank, and the sandbags detonated it, and by the time it got to the metal, it had already concentrated and started to spread out again, and it only gouged out about an inch of metal on the outside and didn't break anything loose on the inside. And those sandbags saved my life. Well, there had been an order put out. All tanks were to remove their sandbags. But the people who wanted to enforce the order.
Okay, we were talking about when the
Panzerfaust.
Panzerfaust hit your detonated with the sandbags and basically saved your life.
Right.
Okay, why would they said not to get rid of the sandbags?
Okay. I have explained to you previously what a bogey wheel was. A bogey wheel was a steel wheel with a U-shaped rim on the outside and a layer of vulcanized rubber about 2 inches thick. And when they vulcanize this rubber, there are air bubbles in it. And with the sandbags on the front of the tank, it put extra weight on the front bogey wheels. And we were blowing out a lot of these bogey wheels because they would get hot and explode, the rubber. They were running out of bogey wheels. So the order came down to get rid of all the sandbags. That was to reduce the number of bogey wheels we needed. But also it would increase the number of people killed. So it was a choice we made to keep the sandbags.
When you this is on 2 occasions so far you have escaped death. What's that like afterwards? What was that like for you?
You don't think about it right away. It just kind of sinks in later. And you just thank God that He was looking after you. That's all I can say.
So the 493rd, were they ever up to full force any time after Herleshheim?
Now, you mentioned the 493rd. That's the Armored Field Artillery. I think you meant the 43rd Tank Battalion.
Yeah, I did.
We received 5 new tanks after Herleshheim. And then we went down to the Osage Mountains. We were the only armored division in U.S. Army armored division in Europe that fought under the French First Army. And at that time, we closed the Colmar pocket and trapped about 300,000 Germans. So then we came back and ran some training problems with the infantry because they had new people, lots of new people, and we had new people. And during this period, we got 8 more tanks. So we had 4. We got 5 as 9 and 8, 17. Our normal complement with the company commander's tank was 18. So you might say we had 3 full 5-tank platoons at that time before we made the drive to the Rhine River. So that answers your question.
So we talked about Herleshheim and Colmar, and that experience in there where you escaped from your tank. That was the second time. Okay, are there any other really specific memories between Herleshheim and Colmar that you need to share with us?
Well, those two followed one another. The incident I just told you about where we were hit with the Panzerfaust, that's after we crossed the Rhine and the Main River, or the Main, the way they say it. And then on the outskirts of the outskirts of the ball bearing center in Germany. I just can't recall the name of it. We were approaching the town and supporting the infantry, and we went through an artillery barrage, and my right tank was knocked off. Probably a 150 millimeter German howitzer round hit the right front sprocket and blew the track apart. So that was the last interesting experience we had. We were the company maintenance tank retriever came up and towed us out of the immediate area behind a hill. Then they went back and drug our track back, and we replaced the broken links. We were back in action in about 4 hours. So that was just a little episode. Incidentally, in the incident where the Panzerfaust hit the tank, the crew under the command of Sergeant White eliminated this entire group of Germans that attacked us, for which he was awarded the Silver Star.
How did this happen? I mean, how did...
There are lots of things happen in wartime. You attribute it to lack of communications or miscommunications. We knew, we'd been warned that there were infantry patrols, our infantry patrols, so that they got close before we recognized who they were. And as I said, the infantry hadn't made contact with us or us with them. So tanks are vulnerable when you don't have infantry with you in a town or a village or a city. And that's how that came about.
When you think about White, tell me about him. What kind of man he was? Characteristics that made him a good leader?
Oh, Sergeant White?
Mm-hmm.
Sergeant White was a very practical person from Idaho. Some people might say he went by the book, but he was just extremely fair. And when we'd pull into a town, the rule was there had to be somebody in the tank to move the tank, to fire the main gun, and to man the radio. And other people could be out picking up souvenirs or whatever. And if you picked up too much and cluttered up the tank, I've seen instances where somebody brought a set of silverware aboard the tank, and he threw it out. The tank behind us stopped and picked it up. Well, you see, he was concerned about that box getting caught in the turret because it's an open cage. And he was more concerned with having the tank neat and tidy to accomplish the mission. So I liked Sergeant White very much because you knew where you stood with him, and you knew he wouldn't accept anything but the best from you, and so that's what you gave him. He was an outstanding leader, and he was given a battlefield commission.
Tell me what exactly a battlefield commission is.
A battlefield commission? Okay. We lost our company commander at Hurlsheim. So the motor officer, Lieutenant Livingston, first lieutenant, became the company commander and was subsequently appointed to captain. So they had to uh, give a battlefield commission to somebody because we were short an officer. We might get a lieutenant as a replacement, or if somebody had demonstrated leadership abilities, they would give them a battlefield commission. During this period before we went to the Rhine River, our first sergeant called, maybe 10 or 12 of us out in a formation and said there is an officer candidate school being established south of Paris in France, a 5-week course to commission battle experienced people. And were any of us desirous of going? I asked what branch the commission would be, and they said infantry. And I said, where would you come back to the division? And he said, no, not necessarily. You'd be assigned any place the Army needed you. And I elected to remain a tank driver, and one man in the company stepped forward and said, I'll go. And they wrote a glowing recommendation for him. When they sent him back to division headquarters, they gave him a battlefield commission on the spot and sent him back to C Company. A month later, he was killed by a sniper. And you never know. But I enjoyed driving the tank.
Were you ever wounded?
No. In my entire military career, I've spent some time in the hospital, but it was all sports-related events to stay healthy. My elbow swelled up once. I tore the ligaments in my right leg. I tore up my heart scuba diving. And these are things that were reasons I entered the hospital, but I was lucky I never was wounded in battle.
Were there many of you in the 43rd that were not? Were you very fortunate?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the question.
In the 43rd, what were the percentage of men that were not wounded?
Can't answer that. I don't have
You
the
don't know.
slightest. I know in my company we have a list of those who were hospitalized. Later in our association, I got a copy of each morning report from the first day of June of 44 through, first day of December 44 through 30 June 45, so I could, I have that information available, but I never analyzed it.
Have you ever thought about the fact that you never went through? I mean, you went through close calls, but never wounded.
I guess I'm an eternal optimist, and it paid off. I just never thought that I wouldn't come home. And of course, I was lucky in the respect that I made it. That's all.
Tell me about going across Europe spearheading. What was y'all's role in it? Y'all got past the Rhine. What was y'all's role after that?
Okay.
Get me through there.
We would hit 2 or 3 towns in a day's time. The division was made up of 3 combat commands, and generally they had 2 combat commands abreast, and there would be 2 or 3 task forces established in each combat command. And based on what your objective was, they would either make it tank heavy or infantry heavy or a balanced force. And you just went as fast as you could. One of the other infantry battalions, I understand, traveled 54 miles in one 8-hour period during combat, which is very significant. And we would get held up by roadblocks. One of our tanks had a dozer blade on it, like a Caterpillar tractor, and we would fire into these roadblocks and break them up a little bit, and then the dozer would break them apart. But a roadblock is left to do several things. One, it may be just to delay you so they can build better fortifications elsewhere, or they may use it as a trap. If the whole company lines up behind that and they have guns situated so they can pick you off, you're stopped and bunched up, and that can be a hazard. So there have been instances, I can't recall that it happened to me, where they picked off the back tank and then started working over the column because they had nowhere to go. But you would, if the ground conditions were such, you could go out, leave the roads, and
Okay. Tell me, what did you learn about yourself during World War II?
you should have warned me in advance of that question. I learned a little better how to get along with people. One of the problems that we as a group coming from Texas A&M, they considered us young, smart aleck college kids. And that's probably because we were. And the problem with my first tank commander really started when I joined his crew, because he wanted me, he'd give me a job to do, and then he insisted I do it exactly the way he'd been trained to do it, and I could find easier ways to do it. Well, if he wasn't around, I'd do it the easier way. He caught me. We just didn't get along from that standpoint, and that was probably more my fault than his, because after all, he was the boss. And I learned a little bit, and each day I was a little older. I certainly appreciated life more after that experience, and that, up to that time, that was the greatest event, not in glorified manner, but the biggest event that I'd ever participated in. So I just thank the Lord that I made it.
How have those lessons changed how you have lived your life?
Well, in several stages, I made the military a career. And the military is really a people business. In peacetime, you're teaching and training and dealing with people. Two people can have nearly equal ability, but the man with the best personality will be more successful because he can be a better leader. I had a problem with that personality bit. I was too much of a loner and not too interested in people. And eventually I learned, but I guess that was part of my problem in my first days in the military.
So, from what you've said, do I understand that it was hard to kind of get into the groove of being a member of a group and learning how to work in a group?
That's probably it. I wasn't necessarily a group person. I grew up in the country, and when I went to school, I was with a group of people. But the kids that lived in town had informal gangs, so as to speak, and I wasn't part of that. So, by the same token, I told you I'd got married early in my training, so even though I was in a company, any free time I had, I spent with my wife. I didn't go downtown with a bunch of fellas to a bar or to the PX and have a couple of beers. I was spending the time with my wife.
What was it like for you and her when you left to go to war?
Well, we had talked, and many times before I was called to active duty, and we were engaged, but we didn't intend to get married until after the war, and there was no point in starting something that might be interrupted, although I really didn't think so. I was confident I'd come home, but I still wasn't comfortable getting married. But I went and took 18 weeks to basic training, and I never missed anybody so much in my life as I missed my fiancée at that time. So at my first opportunity, I went home and got married. I think that was the answer to your question.
Did she follow you to Abilene?
Yes, we drove to Texas A&M, and she was there while I was there. And then we rode a troop train to Abilene, and she and a few other people rode a civilian train to Abilene. And when she got to Abilene, she called the post and said, "There's a troop train of soldiers coming, and where would they be situated?" And they had no information on a troop train of people. Well, the reason they didn't have any information, we weren't going to the post. We were going to the 12th Armored Division, which was attended on the post. They knew we were coming. They were prepared to meet us, and it wasn't any problem of the post. So I guess my wife kind of got excited when they couldn't answer her question. She just didn't know enough about the Army at the time. I probably didn't either, but anyway, it all worked out. She finally located me. So yes, she accompanied me to Abilene. When we drove to Abilene, to College Station, Texas A&M, after we got married, we drove my car. And the rumors had it that we were going someplace in New England from College Station. And my tires wouldn't handle that trip. So I sold my car. And that's why she had to ride the train. So after the war, I couldn't buy it back for what I'd sold it for. You know, there was such a shortage of automobiles.
Tell me what you have done as you look on your career. No, first I want to find out. Did you liberate any of the death camps or any of that?
Yes, when after we the area where we had our tank knocked off, that was Schweinfurt. That's where the ball bearing center. From there we turned south towards Nuremberg and Munich. Now, an armored division doesn't go through a big city like that. That's a job for the infantry. But as we went south, we got to the Landsberg area of Germany, which is on the Leech River, about the 27th of April. And we were there for a couple of days, while the engineers were repairing a railroad bridge across the Leech River. And that's the area, a village of Kaufering, where we liberated a Nazi camp. We had also overrun a prisoner of war camp. Had about 1,500 prisoners, of which about 700 were American POWs. And so I can't really isolate where that was. But we did hit this concentration camp. Now, I personally did not get to that camp, but my first sergeant did, and a few of the others of our